This session will be taken up by Freddy Daruwala. Freddy Daruwala is a tax lawyer and qualified chartered accountant with areas of expertise in cross-border taxation, transfer pricing, intellectual property law, with super specialization in transfer pricing in relation to intangibles. His academic achievements are he's an LLM in commercial law, gold medalist Mumbai University, LLB he stood second in Mumbai University, CA final All India rank 44th in first attempt, and BSc honors rank 5th in Mumbai. Freddy has over 2 decades of experience in taxation and intellectual property law, having practiced before several judicial fora like Intellectual Property Appellate Board, Controller of Patent and Register of Trademarks, and the Bombay High Court. He is currently a partner in Nasikwala Law Office, a law firm practicing mainly in areas of direct taxation and intellectual property law, dispute resolution, real estate, banking, finance, heads, direct taxes, and intellectual property law practices area. He is also tax counsel for JMP Advisors Private Limited, a premier consulting firm specializing in corporate and exchange control laws, taxation and transfer pricing. He has also lectured extensively on cross-border tax and transfer pricing and is former faculty for income tax at the Government Law College. Freddy is also co-authored for the Chamber's prestigious publication Practical Guide to Indian Transfer Pricing, having authored the chapter on intangibles, and has over 50 topical articles to his credit in international taxation, corporate tax professional, taxman, SEBI corporate tax laws. He has also contributed and being interviewed to Euromoney, India Business Law Journal, Legal Era, and other units. He has also appeared in CNBC TV in an interview on the Vodafone judgment. He has also authored Guide to Allied Laws, a non-profit organization, both published under the auspices of grant received from the Ford Foundation of USA. With this, I present before you Freddy. And before I request him to give his presentation, may I request Kiran Bhai to hand over a memento to Freddy. Freddy, floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Very happy to be here again for the third time in succession. My special thanks to the Chamber and for Devendra Bhai for giving me such gracious introduction. Today we have to take a topic which, to boil it down to its essence, is intangible. Furthermore, there is this is the graveyard shift. So one has to have some kind of lighter perspective in the topic. Now, these are my objectives. The first one, active two-way participation, is from a very selfish interest. You have to prevent me from falling asleep after such a nice lunch. Then this subject again, as I said, it's too serious to be taken seriously. The third one is a Latin phrase which I use. It basically means that I shall speak only when the words in my opinion outweigh silence. So I shall not speak more than necessary. And I also believe there should not be any death by PowerPoint. You will not see any bullets in my slides because of that. And we are anecdotal and experiential rather than academic. So before I start, I just want to point out in a lighter vein to the audience that we've had a very sumptuous lunch. Need to lose calories, and thunderous applause is known to expend at least 10 calories a minute. Thank you. I didn't mean it literally. So let's get started. Okay. Intangibles. Basically, this is what Albert Einstein said. I can't better it. And in my limited experience in this field, with due respect to the ladies here, this subject is like a gentleman entering a lady's washroom. Very few men have ever gone there before. Then, as our previous learned speaker also said, the income tax officers, the income tax powers that be have been extremely courageous to the point of foolhardiness and defined intangibles. With that too with retrospective effect from 1/4/2002. Now, what does the scope of intangible property include? It includes what is known as marketing, technology design, artistic data processing, customer, and contract. I have my variations and views on a lot of these things, but the tax authorities seem to think that customer intangibles are also very important, which may only be true in a limited sense. For example, you may have a customer list tomorrow, you don't provide adequate services, he is going to go elsewhere. So I don't see where the question of customer intangibles is. Contract intangibles by virtue of very favorable contract, but then that does not really compensate you for the risk taken in entering into that contract at the time, where it may not have been so favorable. It's like if you enter into an option contract on the stock exchange, a call option when the price is low and price shoots up, you make money. You can't say it's a contract intangible because you have taken the risk. Anyway, goodwill, human resources. Again, another thing where is location. According to me, location doesn't deserve to be here because location is tangible. Today, if you are at VT and you are in McDonald's, you can't say that McDonald's, the real estate is worth X because McDonald's is there. Had it been a CA or a law firm, it would have been minus X. You can't say that. This is what the thing is trying to do. That because the value of real estate is absolute. You can't say because of McDonald's, the real estate has shot up. Then this is your more of methods, programs, algorithms, surveys. Basically, all these, by and large, are excluded from the scope of patent law and methods programs. But still, in their wisdom, the tax authorities have included them. Any similar item deriving value from intellectual content. Now, these are the classifications. The most important, according to me, are IPR and non-IPR. Because there at least you have law, you have legal decisions. You can, with, of course, limited scope, value them. But the others are actually really intangible. And it's going to be anybody's guess as to what a TPO assigns arm's length prices. Other registrable but non-transferable rights. I don't know what they mean by that unless they mean something known as a geographical indication, which has come in very lately in the realm of IP law and we'll deal with. Now, mainly I'm going to deal in this presentation, also because of paucity of time and also because, a lot of CAs are interested in learning more about intellectual property rights. And they haven't really gone into it. And this is gaining more and more importance. As I say, these two things in transfer pricing are going to become more and more relevant as the years go by. One is IPR and one is derivatives. Derivatives, there is absolutely nothing today. But believe me, it is going to be a huge, huge thing in the future. Now let's mainly deal with intellectual property rights. In this also, I will actually give you practical pictures, sound clips, film clips. This is one of the reasons why the presentation is not distributed today, because the majority of it is in that format. It's collectively around 40 MB. So I could not reduce it to print form. That's one of the main reasons. There are a few slides in between, but without those things, the slides are virtually meaningless. Let's get into it. What is an intellectual property? It is some right from an intellectual endeavor. Something which has come from the brain and which is intangible. Then it confers an advantage. Now, third is, it is generally territorial. This is a very important point which is overlooked because the Income Tax Act and transfer pricing are extraterritorial. Today, if I have a trademark in the USA, I have to register in India. Or at least it's preferable to register in India for remedies. There's no have to, but it's going to be very difficult enforcing it if you are not registered. Copyright also, by and large, it's territorial, but there are conventions. Patent is territorial unless you register it simultaneously in several territories using what is known as a patent cooperation treaty application. Then there are civil and criminal remedies available. Civil and criminal remedies are there for trademarks and copyright, not for patent. That's a very important thing to remember. And last but not least, an IP right is a negative right. It's like today I am producing a particular good, I am affixing a trademark or using a service mark in respect of those goods. I cannot stop or preempt somebody from giving the same trade or service. I can only prevent him from using my mark. So in essence, as in the US they call it, a patent right is a negative right. It's like a hunting license. It gives you the right to hunt infringers. So it's a negative right. That's a thing very important to remember, especially from a TP perspective. It's not a positive right when you argue a case in TP. This is overlooked. I have not seen any reported judgment stressing on this point. Okay, now let's get into the meat. Patents. Patents are for inventions. Now, a little bit about invention. What is an invention? An invention is something which has an inventive step. Now, what is an inventive step? An inventive step is a step which is not obvious to a person skilled in the art. That means, for example, in machining technology, I am not skilled in the art, so everything is non-obvious to me. But say a fellow technician, when he sees an inventor, he says, "Arey, this is not obvious." And what is more, this is a very difficult thing to actually quantify, because after it is invented, everything becomes obvious to the person skilled in the art. It is the job of the court to determine that it is non-obvious, job of the patent office. Then it confers an exclusive manufacturing stroke marketing right. This marketing now is less and less. Earlier you have exclusive marketing rights under WTO before the new act came into place. As I said, it needs an inventive step. This last thing is again also not stressed upon, that when you actually file for a patent, okay, you may have several different methods of performing it. But you have to, by law, disclose the best method. There may be 10 inefficient methods. You may think, no, after that it will go in the public domain. Why don't I disclose the worst method? Because of this issue in the US, there was a Dr. Gould who invented the laser. Everyone knows what a laser is. Light amplification by the simulated emission of radiation. That is the full form of laser. So that actually the patent was overturned because he did not disclose the best method. Now, when you apply, you have to be mindful of the specifications and claim. Very, very simple. Specification describe the invention in detail. And claim gives the boundary of the invention. Very similar, like when we all go for a plot of land. At the end in the schedule, we define boundaries. Cadastral survey number says bounded on the east by 20 feet road, bounded on the west by field. Same way a claim gives the boundaries to your invention. It tells the other would-be inventors what constitutes your invention and what would constitute infringement. We'll come to this in a little more detail later. Infringement. Basically, when I have a patented product and somebody manufactures a product, achieves a similar result, it amounts to infringement. Now, infringement cannot actually be done unless my patent is registered. And believe me, this patent registration is a huge process, even in India. It's a very long, drawn-out process because, the examiners are also quite now knowledgeable. Plus, Indian patent laws are very stringent. You won't believe it that what is easily patentable in the USA is not patentable in India. Very, very difficult. Especially there is a huge dichotomy between Indian law and US law. EU law, yes, more or less in consonance with India, despite the fact that a new Patent Act has sort of been brought in to appease the WTO, the World Trade Organization, which actually is a creature of the US multinationals. So there was a lot of pressure on India, despite the fact that earlier we had a superb Patent Act. Despite that, they've taken it. Simple reason being is this is what I'm told by my former late senior who was involved. They say they just put the gun to India's head for the textile exports. And not only that, even after the act, they've brought in quotas now on textile. So actually, it's a this. As I mentioned earlier, in patents, there are no criminal remedies whatsoever. Whereas in copyright and trademark, there are civil and criminal remedies. And also, of course, administrative remedies, like where you apply to the registry to knock off or rectify somebody else's trademark or so. Okay, now this a little bit about evergreening. Now, patent what is the issue? First, you draft your claims, specifications. It's over a period of time because you're allowed some time to draft the final claim. Say you give your application. Let's say you give your application today. You will be granted a patent if all goes well within about a year's time or maximum 2 years' time. If all goes well, there are no oppositions or whatever. So your patent will be valid from today for a period of 20 years. After 20 years, it lapses into the public domain. No questions asked. Now, certain of these pharma companies. Now, what did the pharma companies do? That they have, pharma companies basically they have what is known as an API, an active pharmaceutical ingredient, and a base, in which that ingredient is assimilated and sold as a formulation or a bulk drug or whatever. These guys had this patent on certain products. Later on I'll come to product and process patent also. And when the patent is about to expire, what they did was take a slightly different molecular structure, or actually speaking, not even a molecule, an isomer, what is known in organic chemistry as an isomer, and try and repatent it. For example, basically in organic chemistry, there are carbon atoms and hydrogen atoms in a particular generation. I mean, in a particular way. They are arranged in a particular way for aliphatic compounds, and then there's an aromatic compound. Now, suppose the carbon atoms are like this, 5. They have a particular property when put in a pharmaceutical base. It has a patent, product patent. So, when the patent is going to expire, they take the same number of carbon and hydrogen atoms, rearrange them, say like this, okay? Put it in another different base, and try and apply for another patent. So that is what the Indian courts have come down very strongly on in Novartis case. That this is an isomer, an isotope, isomer, similar chemical thing, similar product cannot be patented. Of course, Novartis argued that this altered formula had less side effects and also was more amenable to human consumption. But court said sorry. That is why it was criticized. In the US, they would have gone through. They can, patent anything under the sun. In fact, they've patented potato chips and ice cream in the past. It is there on record. Another thing on pharma patents. We had a terrific Patent Act, 1970, which for pharma allowed only process patents earlier. Process means you have the same drug. I manufacture it by A process. My competitor manufactures the same drug by a B process. He gets a different patent. I get a different patent. Whereas the WTO and a new patent act says that product per se has to be patented irrespective of the process manufactured. There is a history as to why process patents were thrown out. But initially, there was a blood pressure drug by the name of Eldomet. I don't know, the seniors in this room may remember. The very, very famous hot-selling drug manufactured by Merck Sharp Dome India, or Merindes. It was a listed company. It was very, very expensive. Then Dr. Reddy's came on the scene, manufactured the same drug through a different process at 10% of the cost. Believe me, Merind went out of business, sold its real estate to Wockhardt, and it's out of India. So that was one of the main reasons. It was like a huge multinational drug company. So, pharma patents, again, one more issue. Pharma patents, even today, the government has what is known as the power in very limited circumstances to issue compulsory licenses, which is what they're trying to do for Cipla, and that Bayer is, trying. Zenora Fib or some such drug, I don't recall it. That if there is great requirement or there is an epidemic, the government can, because the patent application is with the government, they have the formula, best method. So they can take this and give it to another company. Okay, you produce because we need, the parent company can't produce enough drug. And also even if they produce, they are very, very expensive. So they can give it to another company. Cipla was given this license and has come into a lot of trouble. Anti-cancer, yes. There also, that was with Pfizer, and anti-cancer was with Pfizer. The Pfizer drug would cost, I think, a few lakhs a year for a patient, and Cipla's equivalent drug would cost some 20,000 a year. But then Pfizer has not taken it very well, obviously. So in pharma patents is another thing. Another thing in pharma patents is if you do give a compulsory license, the Act prescribes just a 4% royalty ex-factory price. It's actually known as a solatium, in solace. In legal parlance, known as a solatium. Okay. Now we come to PCT application. This is more important from the context of transfer pricing, because this enables you, like if I am an inventor, I say market for my invention is in, let us say, 30 countries. Okay. Now I have an option. Either I go to each of the 30 countries because patents are territorial in nature and I apply, or I go for what is known as a PCT application. So I can do my home application today. I have another 6 months to apply in whichever countries who have signed the Patent Cooperation Treaty and put a similar application in those countries. Then what happens is, later on, all the applications are examined internationally by one body and an examination report issued. Examination report is basically to show where your invention is not an invention, that this is already there, this is prior art, so and so in this country has already invented it. Then it is up to you, when you go before the examiner or even the controller, to argue, my invention is different. Your invention is this and mine is this, mine is improved, mine is this, you go on. You have to get very, very technical, but you have to argue it. Then, then what happens is post that, after the international examination, by then, 18 months go by. By then you also have an idea. You've applied in 30 countries and at a very nominal cost in the 30 countries. Then you know, okay, out of the 30 countries, basically my product will work only in 5 countries. So then I nominate, because 25 countries go up, and in the 5 countries they enter what is known as the national phase and goes to the national patent offices and are processed in that way. Now, why I am stressing on this is in case you have any patents or patent applications in transfer pricing, please ask what is the stage of the PCT, because it will have a very strong bearing on the arm's length. ITO will just say, okay, this is Pfizer, this drug, this is your drug, I am attributing same price, and you get murdered, you are out of business before you know it. So it's very important to argue on this issue, especially from a transfer pricing perspective. Then we come to patents versus traditional knowledge. Now, the US or somebody in Germany, I think, actually patented neem, an insecticide made from neem, and actually patented it, but then the Indian government with great difficulty got it overruled. Haldi also was on the scope of a patent. Yoga was patented in the US. And yoga is still patented, sorry, not even was. A certain type of yoga you do, you can be sued for infringement because you're not paid royalty to that guy. I'm not joking, it's there. So as I said, in the US is one of the easiest ways to get a patent. Then in the US, integrated circuits are the subject of patent. In India, we have a separate act for them. The Semiconductors and Integrated Circuit Act. Integrated circuits, basically what happens is, do every one of you know what an integrated circuit is? Anyone doesn't know? Okay. Integrated circuits, basically, why do they call it? Earlier, in my days when I studied science, we had these huge circuit boards with different components, capacitors, transistors, thyristors, resistors, huge. Then they found that the silicon, which is a naturally occurring material and abundant in material, a silicon wafer which is doped, then in a very small particle of germanium metal is introduced and a chip made, and if it's etched in a particular way using acid, behaves like that entire circuit. One little chip. Earlier chips used to have 15 and 20 components. Today's integrated circuits have millions of components. I don't know if any of you heard of Gordon Moore's law. Gordon Moore was the founder of Intel. He says the number of components on an integrated circuit will double every 3 years. And he's proved right so far. Again, speed of the response is much faster. Electricity we think is instantaneous, but it's not. When there are complex operations, it takes time. Today, they have what is known as the teraflop barrier in integrated circuits, which means 10 raised to the power 12 cycles a second, which is almost approximately the speed of light. Because so far as Einstein has said, nothing can exceed the speed of light. Although there are these particles which are discovered to exceed the speed of light, but that's a different issue. Then, next thing we come to is plant varieties. In India, we have a separate act for plant varieties also. That means if you discover a new variety, either growing naturally or hybrid or whatever, you are entitled to get intellectual property protection for it. Even there are separate farmers' rights involved. This actually came into focus. How many of you know of the Kargil case? Anybody? Kargil was a US seed company. Okay. Now, they did all this genetic engineering on seeds, such that a farmer buys seeds. Okay. Normally, when a farmer buys seeds, he will plant. Out of his crop, 2% or 3% he'll remove for the next planting. He'll take out the seeds and keep it. Now, what Kargil did was introduce this technology known as GURT, G-U-R-T, gene using restrictive technology. Basically, in common parlance, it is known as terminator gene, which means if you plant a Kargil seed, it will grow. But if you take out the seed and try and replant it, it is sterile. Actually, the same thing is happening for certain kinds of multinational curds, if you notice. I have noticed in my practical experience that you take that bacillus, try and make curd again, it will not come. This is what I and a lot of my friends have noticed. Particular multinational, very famous multinational brand. So we have a plant varieties. Adjunct to plant varieties, we also have what is known as a Biodiversity Act, which is actually for conservation, but has a limited application in intellectual property. Basically, the example on this, would be the Jatropha incident. I mean, this British Petroleum has discovered that a certain plant growing in the wild called Jatropha can be used to produce biodiesel. Now, this act prescribes that if a foreign company does this, there are very stringent requirements. In fact, a lot of prohibitions. Whereas an Indian company is more relaxed because they want to promote indigenous. But then British Petroleum has done what it's wanted. Now this is going on. Because it is biodiversity, basically, a lot of people have not even heard about this act. Even IP practitioners haven't heard about this act, to be very honest. I was fortunate enough in doing one matter on this, that's why I came to know. But so they are actually now trying to bypass the authority, the usual bureaucracy of what, because this authority still doesn't have any power. They say, biodiversity kya hai? Billions involved in stake and all. So this is how it is. Now a little word on US law versus EU Indian laws. This is also very important from a transfer pricing perspective because I've encountered this in practice. Today in India, you say today Namrata and I invent the same thing simultaneously. Namrata beats me to the patent office by an hour. She will be granted the patent in India and in the EU, okay? Which is what is known as a first to file. When I file my application first, I get the patent. US, it is different. US, Namrata and I invent the same thing. Namrata again runs fleet of foot, files her application. Still, I have 1 year to prove that I had invented it first. And, I put my inventor notebooks, this day I did this, that day I did this. And I can file an interference proceeding for 1 year and get Namrata's patent thrown off the book. Even before an opposition, ab initio. So this is something which one must, be mindful of when you are examining transfer pricing in relation to patents filed in the US. There is a second difference also between Indian laws and US laws is, see, in the US, claim which are the boundaries of your invention, there is a literal construction. What is there in words, very clear, unambiguous, is construed. Whereas in India, which of course emanates from England and EU, there is what is known as a purposive construction. Now to elaborate on this, I'll give you an example. Like say I have some very important device. In the US, I am using a bellows, say to pump air, okay? Manual device, like a manual pump. In the US, I write, so-and-so claim, so-and-so with bellows, whatever. Okay, it's written bellows, restricted to bellows, which means today somebody invents the same thing, but instead of the bellows, he puts in an air pump, automated. He would get the patent in US. Whereas in India and EU, he would not get the patent because that claim is purposively constructed, that the purpose is to pump air, not to with a bellows or with a pump or something, and that patent would not be granted. US, they call it, they have their own terminology, they call it file wrapper estoppel. That means whatever is written on the wrapper of the file, the inventor is estopped from claiming anything more. Whereas in the US, in the UK and India, it is known as purposive construction. That is the second difference. So of course, if one has to get into construction of claims, all these things have to be borne in mind. Now, how many of you here know about a basmati issue? Can you tell me, anyone can tell me, is basmati rice, what it is? Is it a trademark? Is it a patent? Is it a geographical indication? No one. Okay.
Natural product.
Sorry?
Natural product.
Yeah, but something has to be there. Like today, Goa cashew fenny is a geographical indication. Scotch whiskey is a geographical indication.
Belongs to India.
Sorry.
It is crop of India. Indian crop.
No. Sadly, very, very sadly, there is nothing to protect basmati today, unfortunately. And there are basically two reasons for this. That it is a long-grained, fragrant rice which grows on the Indo-Gangetic plain and also common to certain areas of India and Pakistan. That is reason number one. Secondly, what does the word basmati mean? Bas means fragrance, mati means queen. So there is absolutely no correlation with rice or product. In fact, there was a Texas company which actually patented basmati, Rice Tech International, and they called it basmati, the patent. Then India was totally unaware of it, at the WTO session in Australia, my former late senior was actually involved in this. And despite no governmental support, he told the government, I'm going to fight for this. He managed to get the basmati out of the patent. But despite this, the tribunal granted that Texmati will allow, basmati won't be a patent, but Texmati has the right to claim that it is superior to basmati. That is still there on the statute, unfortunately, because our government was totally uninterested. And my former late senior fought totally pro bono, free of charge in Australia on this issue. Currently, I was working for one of the best IP councils in India by the name of Mr. Freddy Daruwala. No more, it just expired last year. This is a basmati issue. Okay. Any questions on patent? Anyone? Shall we proceed now to trademarks? Patent is the driest, dullest subject of IP. And in the US, one of the biggest money spinners. But India, you hardly get patent laws. I mean, 1 out of every 1,000 or so. By and large, you get trademark litigation. I would say almost 99 out of 100 would be trademark litigations. But there also, out of those 99, only 1 or 2 will actually give you some principle of law. Otherwise, by and large, trademark and IP litigation is decided in the high courts at the ad interim stage. Ad interim means on the threshold. I mean, you file a notice of motion and you go and argue. Okay, sir, grant an injunction, my lord, grant an injunction against use of his mark, otherwise grave damage will be caused to me. Injunctions are granted on the balance of convenience because the suit will come out after 10 years. Now, if I am defending a trademark, somebody has infringed, I get an injunction in my client's favor. I won the matter because the other chap is not going to wait for 10 years to proceed his suit. In fact, when the suit comes up, in fact, he'll say withdraw. But if I don't get an injunction at the ad interim stage, I have lost because then he is going to develop his trademark. Same with patent. You have to be very careful in IP litigation. There is another thing when you do a due diligence, even for transfer pricing or IP. Ask what is the stage of your application? What is the action taken? Do we have a court order? If you have an injunction as good as your mark is enforced. If you don't have an injunction and it still shows IP and the transfer pricing officer has attributed it to some value, you said, so we have lost it, we no longer have this mark. I mean, in effect, we are gone. Okay. Now, this mark is used in relation to goods or services. This word in relation is very important because we had actually encountered a case many years ago. That time the old act was in force. If you remember, just like you have this Ujala, whitener. In those days, there was a whitener by Ciba Geigy called Tinopal. How many of you remember Tinopal? Huh? There was one fellow in Surat who actually, that used to come in a very distinctive blue little box. Yes. So one person in Surat actually sold this whitener in a transparent plastic pouch. Okay? But on his invoice, he used to write Thinopal. He used to write Thinopal. So, Tinopal, Ciba Geigy came to us, caught him for infringement. He argued, I have not used the mark on goods. So how can you catch me? I am just selling the blue plastic sachet. Only Thinopal is written on my bill. And we argued it's a mark used in relation to goods, not on the goods. Now luckily the new act has rectified it on business papers, invoices, even spoken or the say. And we had the fellow convicted. Then there are now 35 different classes of goods and services. You have to be very, very careful there. Especially in the services, because you know why? Earlier, there were 7 classes. Like classic case, accounting and legal services. It was in class 32. Now you got a registration for class 32. When I was earlier with Juriscorp, we got a registration, service mark, class 32. Now it's in class 35. Automatically. Why? India signed the Madrid Convention. So what happens? So when I search, I'm going to search in class 32 or should I search in class 35? Or should I do both? When I'm applying for a new mark. Believe me, it causes untold problems. Nobody has thought of it. Then there is the concept of the well-known trademark and the service mark. Like certain marks by their very nature, we'll come to a picture slide later where I'll show you this. By their very, very nature are so well known that common law, not statute, common law says they are well known trademarks and they apply uniformly across all goods and services. Otherwise, normally a trademark or a service mark is goods or service specific. That in the past also, I mean, in the old act this has happened. You know, Sony was a very well known mark even then. Somebody came out with Sony nail polish. And it was actually allowed in India because they say that Sony was not such a well known trademark then, its products were not freely available. Only if you went abroad could you get a Sony. But today more and more they are not there. Even today there is a different ground of honest concurrent use. Amul, everyone knows the Amul trademark. Do you know there's Amul, there's a banyan also, Amul Macho. It is allowed, honest concurrent use, because that fellow says, I've been using this 12-15 years, nobody infringed. Amul being a PSU didn't bother to infringe its rights. In that sense, even LIC registered its trademark only about 20 years ago. They were not bothered, the agents were freely using one of the best known trademarks, that hand with that little lamp. They're not bothered, typical PSU attitude. So, Lux belongs to labor. Lux is... Yeah, they can't. But Lux is not really a well-known trademark. See, well-known trademark is what? As I'll tell you, Mercedes-Benz, Daimler-Benz, Rolex, Coca-Cola. In fact, somebody in I think the Far East, I think Bangkok or somewhere, had opened a massage parlor and called it Coca-Cola Massage Parlor. But they said no, nothing doing. Well-known trademark. So that is how. Then trademarks are another thing, that you can even have unusual trademarks based on color, sound, smell, and one more thing is shape, even shape. Now color. Color you can have a combination of colors in India. You cannot have what is known as one single color. But you can have a combination of colors. Abroad, EU, you can have one color. Sound, you can have trademarks. In fact, India has one sound mark registered for Yahoo. That Yordle. It's registered. Smell, abroad it is registered, India they have still not registered. Actually, there are two smell marks which I know of. One was for sewing thread, a smell of plumeria blossoms. And one was of smell of newly mown grass for tennis balls. It is there. Sound we'll see. Again, just as in the Patent Cooperation Treaty, India is a signatory to the Madrid Convention. So you can make convention applications with common examination. So in a transfer pricing perspective, please examine these convention applications very carefully. Tell your client. Because here, TP is done not with the accounts or the tax. TP has to be done in IP, especially with operations and with marketing. And you have to go there and ask them and break their head. You can't do it. Accounts will not even know of all these things. This is a word mark. French Connection UK, very famous word mark. When a mark is registered, you put a little R in a circle next to it. When you have applied for a mark, you put TM, or in case of a service mark, SM, to show the world at large that you've applied. Okay. This is example of a device mark. It's actually applied for in India. Imagine a scenario, you go to the pub, bartender asks you what will you have, you say arrogant bastard. What's going to happen? I don't know. You can have a classic mark. Okay. This is another device mark. Very, very famous. People don't know it. I mean, financial services keep on benchmarking to Sensex, especially the foreigners. They have to be aware that they have to pay a royalty to the BSE. In fact, this was also challenged. BSE's title to the mark was challenged by an analyst called Deepak Mohani. I don't know if you know it, but he lost the matter. Because we had represented his matter, and my late boss had the final say on it. He says there is no sense and no sex in the Sensex. He also said that. So this is a very important mark. Then certain marks have messages behind them. Can you tell me the messages behind these two marks? Yes, correct so far. It's an airline, basically it's an airline. But have you noticed that number one is N and W are both signified in the mark, and also that little tip of the W points to the direction northwest, and the Sony Vaio, and even message behind the mark. Sorry?
It's giving some sign of this music.
Not exactly music. It is actually bringing together. See, this waveform was a classic analog signal of the earlier times in the oscilloscopes. And 1 and 0 is the classic sign of a digital signal. So it is trying to incorporate analog and digital together in the same mark. This is another message in lighter vein. There's a very famous French soft drink. The P is silent. And see the snacks also, the name of the snacks. There's certainly no message in English, or the wrong message in English. Give me a packet of crap and a bottle of shit. Imagine what happens. Okay, now we'll come to sound marks. I'll play 3 sound marks for you which are registered. If you can try and identify them, they're very easy. Correct, absolutely right. MGM. Correct, Walt Disney. It's known as Looney Tunes, this piece. Okay, now the third one. This, I think the seniors will be able to. Yes, Johnny Weissmuller, Tarzan. Okay, now this is an animated sound mark. We'll play this. This is actually registered. Mendel Fox. Now trademark, service marks, let's go into the nitty-gritty after the film. We have, in IP usually you have, I mean you don't say transfer. When you sell something, you use the terminology assignment, because I'm assigning a right. And if you just merely, instead of lease, you use the term license, that is a permission to use for a consideration. So this too have to be examined very carefully. These agreements will be there. They have to be valued. In fact, assignment also carries VAT in Maharashtra state, for your information, apart to a stamp duty. So both these things also have to be examined. From the transfer pricing implications, it is very, very difficult because each mark stands on its own footing, if you ask me. You cannot really compare 2 marks. Also, another thing to be borne in mind is what is the purpose of the mark being used and assigned. When Coca-Cola entered into India, it took away thumbs up from Parle. You know what was the intention of Coca-Cola taking thumbs up? Anybody? Yes, it wanted to kill the brand. Because I happened to be working in Madison at that time, so I was privy to the discussion. Wanted to throw it out, but they couldn't succeed. So then they used it as a flanking brand to attack Pepsi. But that is very important. So you must get the background documentation on the purpose before you actually sit down and transfer price the amount of assignment or the license or whatever. Or what is the commercial exploitation. Then see the ad expenditure backing the trademark. In this, there is a very interesting true anecdote that William Wrigley, you know, the founder of Wrigley's chewing gum. In the olden days, we used to have that little tin foil. He was traveling in a jet, and one of his fellow passengers came to know that he is the chairman of Wrigley's. Yeah, and in those days, Wrigley's used to spend almost $1 million in advertising. And they were in this plane traveling at about 25,000 feet. So he asked him, see, you are by far the market leader in chewing gums. Virtual monopoly, nobody has any competition. Why are you still spending $1 million on advertising? So he just pointed to the engine of the plane. We are already at 25,000 feet. Why are we wasting fuel on the engines? Same way advertising. So you have to see the advertising expenditure behind the mark. Now advertising is a real intangible. I mean, this AMP, you will have a separate session, so I'm not going to touch much upon it. Actually, David Ogilvy, who is known as the father of advertising, has once said, and I think written in his book also, Ogilvy on Advertising, that half of advertising is useless, but we don't know which half. It's a fact. It's actually a fact working in agency. You don't know what little change you do may actually this thing. This is very important in trademarks when you transfer price. Now, under the trademark law, very, very important distinction to bear in mind, the use is predominant over registration. That means, again, Namrata and I have the same mark. Okay, I use it before Namrata. My mark will stand and hers won't. But if I don't register my mark, okay, I can still go after somebody who copies my mark. But I have to bring a passing off action. And passing off is actually a tort, what is known as a civil wrong, where I have to actually prove that by using my mark, a deception or a fraud or misrepresentation is caused in the mind of a person using those goods. Okay, those goods belong to me. If I have registered my mark, I go in for what is known as an infringement remedy. This infringement is only with respect to trademark. Copyright mein infringement means something different. In infringement of trademarks, if my mark is registered, all I do is I go to the courts. My lord, my mark is registered. My goods are these. His mark is this. Goods are similar. They will grant infringement action. Plus, second issue of infringement in the new act, which I'll come in jurisdiction. That today under the new act, okay, the person who is the proprietor of the mark, his jurisdiction, the suit is maintainable. Like for example, if I am registered, I am in Delhi, okay. Somebody infringes my mark, say in Meerut. Under the old act, I would have had to go to the Meerut district court and sue him. Under the new act, I can sue him in Bombay, in the Bombay High Court. The act confers jurisdiction. There is two very important sections, section 134 of the Trademarks Act and section 62 of the Copyright Act, which are exceptions. Coming to jurisdiction, that in the old Trademarks Act, I mean, in the same scenario, I would have had to go to Meerut. This we have a very interesting real life anecdote in jurisdiction, but under the old act. That one day when we were in the office, one chappie came all the way from Tirupur to us. And Tirupur is a well-known center to manufacture hosiery. So he used to manufacture all these briefs and socks and whatever, banyans, and use the exact trademark, Voltas. Exact, V-O-L-T-A-S. So we were also quite stunned, blatant infringement. Then Voltas had given him a notice, threatening everything. So he came running all the way from Tirupur. And Voltas had sued him in Bombay at that time. So my senior asked him, you using Voltas, what does it mean? I mean, give us some background. What do we argue before the judge? That fellow also was a smart aleck. So he told my boss, you know what Voltas means? Venkateshwar, our Lord Tirupur, Andhra State. Upon hearing this, what do you think my boss said? My former late boss. Well, actually what he said I can't repeat here. But whatever happens, in those days jurisdiction was conferred on Tirupur. So the suit was dismissed because we said Voltas has to go and sue him in Tirupur, not in Bombay. He got it thrown out. Okay. Say this now. This is a classic case of infringement and passing off. Man standing his chaddi like this trying to infringe the Mercedes-Benz mark. It's a well-known trademark. And read there, German perfection. VIP Benz. Haibo Hindustan versus Daimler Benz. And in these olden days, despite Mercedes not being available, we got the thing as a well-known trademark and we got this thrown out. Let's see, I mean, how ingeniously it's done. If you look at it in detail, you'll come to know. Okay. Now, these are the issues on trademarks which we have to be a little careful about. The confusion in classes, as I already pointed out. Trafficking in trademark service marks. There's one application one party called Holy Hobby. He went to all the jurisdictions of the world and applied for marks in all the classes. So he's virtually, sealed up that trademark. there was a very important case that, somebody cannot be allowed to enclose the words of the English language for his own personal use, and courts have ruled all over. Okay, you have to use a mark. Non-use is a very good ground for throwing it out. You cannot just hold the marks and sit tight and then, put a gun to anybody's head or sue him for infringement if he has a similar mark. That is one thing. Another issue is parallel imports. This is gaining more and more ground. Recently there was a Samsung case, and it's happened in the case of Lux, this parallel import. Lux, actually what happened is, today you go and buy Lux from a shop, say Crawford Market. Okay? Do you know, it's a genuine Lux, but do you know whether Liver India has manufactured it or Liver Bangladesh or Liver Pakistan? You don't know. Lux is Lux unless you read the label. So this Indian people had actually, Indian manufacturer like even Samsung and Liver wanted to stop this parallel importation. Okay, whatever comes into the country, unofficially, although it may be manufactured by our own subsidiary or our own firm abroad, amounts to infringement. There also, what do you think is the answer? Come on, I throw open the audience. Is it infringement or no? It's a genuine article, only thing manufactured in a different country. Well, sadly, the answer is yes and no. It depends on India's WTO status and the country's WTO status. Now, when we buy some goods, say a wholesaler buys goods and sells it to a retailer, okay? If you read the Trademarks Act very strictly, the retailer is selling somebody else's goods under somebody else's mark. So, strictly speaking, he is liable for infringement. But there is an exception known as exhaustion of rights, which means if the goods are bought in course of trade, regular trade, there is no infringement, no action maintainable. I mean, naturally, otherwise trade and commerce would come to a standstill. Now, certain countries have what is known as national exhaustion, which means the rights are exhausted only in that particular country. So, in such cases, if you have a parallel import, it would amount to infringement. But if you have international exhaustion, then there is no parallel import. So, India unfortunately has international exhaustion, so there is no infringement. Then you have to be, this is one thing also to bear in mind, that in trademarks you have three different types of marks. One is a pure word mark, one is a label mark, which is a picture, and one is a device mark, which is a picture and a word. Now the label mark and the picture, the device mark also can get copyright protection. Copyright is, I'll come to copyright, but when you create an artistic work, you are entitled to copyright. From a practical viewpoint, from criminal action, today if you suspect somebody is infringing your copyright, you can go to the police station, tell a sub-inspector, and the sub-inspector can take action against copyright. But if it's a trademark, you need a DGP level to take action. So initially what these enforcers do is that they first take action against copyright and then against trademark. Now let's come to copyright. This is a very old English couplet which I couldn't resist. It is a crime to steal a hen, but steal 10,000 and we become gentlemen. Copyright is based on the 8th commandment, thou shalt not steal. Okay. Copyright is a mode of expression. Only your mode of expression is covered, not the final product. Which means two people write two books on similar topics. Both have individual copyrights. I even write a spoof on somebody's book, individual copyright. I have a compilation, individual copyright. I compile a telephone directory, separate copyright. And what is covered is literary, artistic, musical, sound recording, cinematographic work, and software. Because software under our Indian Act is known as literary work. Now there is a confusion on embedded software, that you have a device in which the software is hardwired. Where should that go, patent or copyright? There is still a controversy. In the US it goes under patent. There is a case law to that effect. Under copyright, basically, there are these three main rights and then there are neighboring rights. Three main rights are right to exploitation, which means if I am the owner of copyright, I have the right to make money out of it, even from derivatives. Like, when Harry Potter came out on the road, initially, there was this Hari Kumbhar, Marathi. This is actually a derivative work, but then Bloomsbury, who is a publisher, managed to get them off. Then the right to paternity means I have the right to be known as the author of that work. Because today if I put a book and I am the author, okay? So everyone must know that I am the author. You can't conceal it. And third is right to integrity. I have the right to ensure that my work is not tampered with, because if somebody tampers with it, there are chances that my reputation may get damaged. Classic case like all these old law texts, Mullah on the Contract Act, latest edition. I mean, Mullah is long dead and gone. So is Kanga and Palkhewala. Today we are in its third edition. First one I think was the original, then it was Dinesh Vyas, and then now I think Arvind Datta has done it. Yes. So they must have taken care of this right to integrity. Now there are this big, huge laundry list of exceptions to what is infringement. So many things, I mean it's a whole section, I can't cover everything, but let's say that there is a concept known as fair deal. Like for example, you use copyrighted article, say in studying, or you use it in a judicial proceeding, or you use it in some sort of manner which doesn't really harm the author. Section 52 has a whole laundry list of sections, plenty of them. There are exceptions to infringement. So if somebody has an infringement action and you're trying to attach a value to the copyright, just look at this. If it falls under exceptions, then there is no value to that copyright. Then there are what is known as neighboring rights. Neighboring rights are rights which are not actually copyrights but are embodied in the act. They are broadcast rights, performers' rights, directors' rights. That means if I have broadcasted something, I have a right to, have some right in respect of that broadcast. If I am a performer, I have a certain right in that performance. It's like, I don't know how many of you have seen Pink Panther, the old ones and the new ones. Old ones was Peter Sellers. I mean, he was known as Inspector Clouseau. Now I think that Steve Martin has come up with that series. But in my opinion, Peter Sellers still has a very strong performance right, and probably his estate was compensated for that. That is a neighboring right. Any questions so far? Sorry, everyone. Either everyone is very sleepy or everyone knows everything. No questions. Okay. Now how do we deal with copyright? Again, we have a license versus assignment. Fair dealing we have to be very careful of. I mean, as you say, see all the exceptions of infringement. Then there is a concept, I mean this is embodied strangely enough in a sales tax judgment, TCS. License versus copyrighted product. That if I have sold a book, she buys a copy. She has just bought the copyrighted product. She doesn't have a license to copy and redistribute it. Whereas if I have sold the rights to her to redistribute the book in a particular region and give me a royalty, that is a license. Or even an assignment. If I relinquished all my rights, then an assignment. Again, jurisdiction, as I mentioned, section 62 of the Copyright Act. This was actually brought in for authors. That they cannot go and sue that infringer at the place of residence of infringer, so they are allowed to sue in their own jurisdiction. These two sections are very important. As I said, section 62 of Copyright Act and section 134 corresponding of Trademarks Act. Now the copyright of public domain. Anyone? Today, can I take 20 prints of Mona Lisa and put them up in my house? Or this Vincent van Gogh self-portrait where he had cut off his ear. Probably there was no rock music then, otherwise he would have cut off his other ear, I think. Anybody? See, copyright generally persists 60 years after death of the author. So after that, things go into the public domain, irrespective. Sorry, 60 years. Yes, 60. And in case of a joint author, it is after the last person expires, 60 years after his. Okay. Now this is a literary work. Does this second one, which is a spoof, have its own copyright? Come on, anybody? Can it be said he is infringed on Chicken Soup for the Soul? This thing is a spoof, Chicken Poop for the Soul. Answer is no, because here it's very clearly a spoof. If he had copied things and put his own name, yes, it would have been an infringement. Okay. Now I'm going to play a small sound clip. As a practice, 3 or 4 minutes. Do we still have time, Devendra bhai? How are we? 10 minutes, no? 10, 15 minutes. But there's 4 minutes because I could have cut short. Now, this is a very old clip from this film called Pyasa. Why I liked it is because the story is based on copyright infringement. Because So I'll play it. After that, just observe it carefully, and then one or two questions we'll raise on this clip. Who owns what? Let's see. Sound.
ये इंसान के दुश्मन समाज की दुनिया ये महलों ये तख्तों ये ताजों की दुनिया ये इंसान के दुश्मन समाजों की दुनिया ये दौलत के भूखे रवाजों की दुनिया ये दुनिया अगर मिल भी जाए तो क्या है ये दुनिया अगर मिल भी जाए तो क्या है
Want me to stop it anytime? Please tell me. I can stop it. Huh? Better you can see a certain thing.
ये दुनिया है यार में बद हवा सी ये दुनिया अगर मिल भी जाए तो क्या है ये दुनिया अगर मिल भी जाए तो क्या है यहाँ एक खिलौना है इंसान की हस्ती ये बसती है मुर्दा पर की बसती यहाँ पर तो जीवन से है मौत सस्ती ये दुनिया अगर मिल भी जाए तो क्या है ये दुनिया अगर मिल भी जाए तो क्या है भटकती है बदकार बनकर जवान
What I'll do is I'll minimize this and I'll play this clip from the outside. Let's see if that improves, then we'll go ahead.
ये महलों ये तख्तों ये ताजों की दुनिया ये ये तख्तों ये ताजों की दुनिया ये इंसान के दुश्मन समाजों की दुनिया है इंसान की हस्ती ये बसती है मुर्दा परस्तों की बसती यहाँ पर तो जीवन से है मौत सस्ती ये दुनिया अगर मिल भी जाए तो क्या है ये दुनिया अगर मिल भी जाए तो क्या है भटकती है बदकार बनकर जवां जिस्म सजते हैं बागार बनकर यहाँ प्यार होता है व्यापार बनकर ये दुनिया अगर मिल भी जाए तो क्या है ये दुनिया अगर मिल भी जाए तो क्या है
What's this saying?
जहाँ आदमी कुछ नहीं है, वफा कुछ नहीं, दोस्ती कुछ नहीं है। ये दुनिया जहाँ आदमी कुछ नहीं है, वफा कुछ नहीं, दोस्ती कुछ नहीं है। जहाँ प्यार की कद्र ही कुछ नहीं है, ये दुनिया अगर मिल भी जाए तो क्या है, ये दुनिया अगर मिल भी जाए तो क्या है।
And mercifully the end. Okay. Okay. Now, coming back to copyright, as I mentioned earlier, first of all, let's take the questions on the clip. We've gone through 4 minutes of it, so why I showed it to you is there are a few issues which actually come in practice for an opinion. But first of all, let's start with very basic. Let me put it to the audience that how many copyrights are there in a song? Sorry? Yes, music means, can you be music? No, can you be more explicit? You are partly correct. Yeah, there's a composer, 1. Okay, lyricist, 2. Anything else? Singer will come under performance rights, neighboring rights. I am talking of the per se song. Singer will also be there, but neighboring right. No, that is different. That's cinematography. You assign all those rights. Third, very important, is sound recording, subject matter of copyright. Remember. So basically, in a song with lyrics, there are 3 copyrights. In an instrumental without lyrics, there are 2 copyrights. Okay. Second issue here. What are the neighboring rights? I mean, one you mentioned, singer. Second, any other neighboring rights? Broadcast rights. Somebody has an exclusive. Earlier, Doordarshan, Chayagit. Remember all those? They had what is known as the broadcast right. Third is performance rights would go to the singer, that is Muhammad Rafi in this case, as well as to Guru Dutt, because he has acted out this. They would both be liable for performance rights. Now it gets a little bit more complicated. This opinion, I'll tell you about the actual real life. You know that Mughal-e-Azam was the first old film to be colored, right? Thankfully, all that colorization and all was done in India. In this issue, the actual parties had come to us to have it colorized and by a Dubai-based company. And they would then do it, be a sort of central repository of the IP of many such films, license them to India, Pakistan, including Gulf. So, classic case of transfer pricing. Actually, I've encountered this. Next, I mean an issue emanating from that. What would a colorization right be? Would you have to pay the producer or not? Would you say it's a right of integrity is infringed? Yes, even I think so. I mean, a varied opinion, but I also think so. If you ask me, this poor Guru Dutt committed suicide. If he had not done so, he would have seen the colorized version and done so. So, yes, very strongly when I feel. Then the cinematographic, the producer has the rights in the film. And normally what happens is, music rights are separate. Music is invariably in an Indian film is released almost a month before the film hits the screen, because it's assigned away. And then producer takes over the rights of all these people. Then the producer becomes the sole copyright owner. This is done through that association, IMPPA, Indian Motion Picture Association. Okay. One more thing before we end copyright. Today there are so many, especially in music, there are so many different singers with different popularities of songs which I have not mentioned you, it struck me, which I think I should mention is, the Act also provides for something known as copyright societies. They are these independent bodies. Generally there is only one body for each class of work. And if you want to use that work, you have to pay a particular amount of royalty to that copyright society. How many of you have booked halls in functions for parties? And that hotel or whoever has said, no, sir, आपको license का पैसा देना पड़ेगा, 2,000-3,000 to the copyright society for playing music. So there are copyrights which actually collect from all sources and try and make an equitable distribution to authors, and they are mainly in terms of music. In fact, one of these functionaries was telling me that today the main infringing device for music is not the CD or the cassette, it is your mobile phone, the chip on the mobile phone. According to me, there also, according to me, if you have a private party in a hotel, it does not amount to infringement, because a private party in the hotel is an extension of your house. Because you cannot accommodate, say, 50 people in a house, you book a hall. But you go and sit in a restaurant where members of the public can come and sit, have a meal, listen to music, yes, you have to pay the copyright society. This is one insight. I have actually given opinions to that effect. Now we go, copyright is an adjunct to trademark protection. As I said, you have a device mark or a label mark. You actually have an artistic work under which you can claim copyright protection, and as I mentioned, you can take a sub-inspector's help in criminal action. Then this is another very interesting issue where only courts have ruled. Today, let's take a copyright. You are an employee in a company, and by your contract of employment, all copyrights vest with the company. So what is the term of that copyright? Normally, because the Act only says 60 years after death of author. Now, corporation has an infinite life. So what would be the life of the copyright? Any thoughts on that? Well, courts have ruled in England that creator of copyright has to be an individual and he is deemed to assign it to the corporation. Copyright still would end at the 60 years after death of the author. But this is what court ruling, there's nothing in the Act on this. Okay. Now, under 52J, exceptions to infringement, this is a very strange provision, without the law mentioning whether it has to be read in conjunction or disjointly. The first provision, 52I and 52J, if I recall correctly. 52I says that if you use somebody else's musical or artistic or cinematographic work, you have to pay him royalty. 52J says if before using someone's cinematographic, or when using someone's cinematographic or music work, you have to take his permission. Now, does this amount, okay, I am using it, then I say, sorry, bhai, I used your work, here's the royalty, or do I have to take your permission in advance? This is a vexing question of law. It's not answered, it's answered one way by one court and the other way by the other court. This is also a very big issue in copyright. Now, the next IP we come to is designs. Designs, there's a Designs Act 2000, where aesthetics, anything which is like, say, you have a very fancy tap, or you even have a dress designer, good dress, you can actually register it as a design. See, when you actually, now I'll explain to you, when you create it, because of the creation, you get copyright in it. But if you want to commercially exploit it, you have to register it as a design, because section 15 of the Copyright Act says that any copyrighted article, if copies are made by machine or any other process, more than 50 copies, it loses copyright. So you have to register it as a design. As I said, design is anything aesthetic, form or function based. It's an adjunct to copyright law. It has a gaining importance of design. Now, in this also there is one vexing question which nobody has really answered. Earlier, this, especially our Indian painters, they used to put one painting up for sale in the gallery. Today, the practice is they make numbered signed 200 copies. I know for a fact because one of my friends has bought one of those copies. They make 200 copies. Would that painter lose his copyright by virtue of this section 15 of the Copyright Act? Because he has made copies with a mechanical process and more than 50 copies. Answer is yes, you have to be careful. This is one of the loopholes. Anything, design may be anything. The most wackiest ones which I tried and pull out, and just to give you a flavor of the design. See the heels of the shoes. I don't know. I've never seen such shoes, although it's a matter of time, I think, before they're there in India. Designer is one Kurt Geiger, for your information. Then there is this gold-plated commode and bidet. That is also a design. They're all registered designs. Now, other intellectual property rights. I think we're running a little short of time. But anyway, I'll skip through the balance slides. The meat of the presentation is almost over. Now, we have what is known as geographical indications. Geographical indications, rather than going to the law, explained very simply. Earlier, for years together, there was Scotch whiskey. Everybody's heard of Scotch whiskey, if not actually tasted it. So, Scotch whiskey was there. Now, in India, they brought what is known as Peter Scott, Khode and Company from Bangalore. Then McDowell brought what is known as single malt. Now, the Scotch Whisky Association took objection, saying if you use the term Scotch, it has to be from Scotland because of geography. Same way, the Indege had brought out Indian champagne, Marquis de Pompadour. I don't know if you know it. And then suddenly they changed the name to sparkling wine. Why? Because Champagne is the name of the district in France. You can only have champagne emanating from France, nowhere else in the world. In fact, even in the 1900s, there was a challenge that in Spain, there was a firm called Costa Brava. They produce what is known as Spanish champagne. So actually, Bollinger, one of the biggest manufacturers of champagne in Champagne, France, sued them successfully and got the name champagne thrown out. So that is why if a particular article emanates from a particular geography, it is entitled to a protection known as geographical indicator. Now, there are, even today, this act is new. Despite that, there are about, if I last count, over 150 geographical indicators in India itself. There are some different varieties of rice from Andhra Pradesh. Sadly, Basmati is not in that list. There is cashew fenny. There are Kolhapuri chappals. There is this Sholapur coverlets, duvets. So there are plenty of those things there. As I said earlier, plant varieties are there. Biodiversity I have already covered. Trade secrets and know-how. That is a very important part of IP. Now, trade secrets does not get its sort of enforcement under the Act, but through law of contract. Which is the most famous trade secret in the world, anyone knows? Yes, the formula of Coca-Cola. Because if they patent it, after 20 years it goes into the public domain. They've lost it. That is why it's been kept as a trade secret, deliberately. Then there's this traditional knowledge. That is like neem is there, haldi is there, yoga is there, which is out of the scope, but it's also an IP. I mean, today an Indian can market and sell it and make money from it. That unique IP. Then there's character merchandising, which I told you about, Inspector Clouseau earlier. Then this shape. This is a very interesting case which we had advised on. There is this bottle of vodka, which is not even available in India, called Gorbachev. It is this unique shape. This shape actually has this onion-shaped dome followed by a base. Now, there was an Indian company which wanted to bring vodka in a similar bottle, which had a green label. I think Himalaya Distilleries. But Gorbachev successfully preempted them from bringing that shape. Despite the fact that that shape, that Indian company had registered that shape as a design, and also Gorbachev is not available officially in India. Despite that, they managed to injunct. Bombay High Court Justice Chandrachud gave that judgment. I was present in court when this happened. So this is also an IP. Second is the shape of the Zippo lighter. It's registered as a trademark. Third is trade dress. Colgate has successfully sued Anchor white toothpaste on its packaging, this red distinctive packaging. Because in the rural area, people can't read. In fact, they don't say toothpaste. They say, "Arey bhai, Colgate de hoye." That's how the brand penetration is. So this is also an IP. Now we come to our boring old transfer pricing again. Management services, which I think most of you would have read because everything what I'm going to discuss is there in OECD or in transfer pricing. But basically very few points we'll touch upon. That service is not defined, whether intra-group services are chargeable, and what is an arm's length charge. All questions, no answers. Again, what is the criterion of defining intra-group services? Payment, arrangement, contractual nomenclature, benefits days. One very interesting issue is the stewardship issue. Recently, the Morgan Stanley judgment in the Supreme Court brought the issue of stewardship and said that in case of a stewardship, no PE is created. I think we can use this very much to our benefit in transfer pricing management. If we can prove stewardship, it's a very good tool for tax planning. We say there are no services. My overseas parent is just coming here to oversee his investment. He's a steward. If he had not given me these directions, the company would have made less profit or would have made a loss. This is one issue which I just wanted to highlight. Nothing more. Devendra bhai, how is the time scenario? 5 minutes? All right. Then again, cost sharing arrangements, cost contribution arrangements. There are these different issues which one has to consider. I'm just glossing through issues because the time is a little bit of a constraint. But any particular question, I'll be happy to take. 92B, obligation, effect of subsidies. What happens if one country has a subsidy and another service doesn't have? There is no answer. What are the allocation keys? I can virtually play about with the numbers using different allocation keys and have different arm's length prices. Then there's the OECD and the Australian tax office view. Then post-tax, pre-tax effect. Total non-uniform accounting standards. In fact, some of the smaller countries don't have accounting standards. What do you do on that? Then buy-in, buy-out payments. I mean, to get into the service, you have to pay an amount to buy in. Get out, you may get a buyout. Well, how do you quantify the benefits? Then future benefits, whether they are there or questionable. Because most of these, I mean, if you see the corporate world, they say synergy and better cost control and all. 99% of the case it doesn't happen. It collapses. I mean, tell me if I'm wrong, but I think that is by and large the case. And as I said, multiple allocation keys. And here we can ask as many questions as we want without any answers. In these two things, before going, I would say one thing. Basically, since I'm a tax lawyer, I look at it from the perspective of a dispute. I presume that the TPO is going to challenge my contention, and I generally look at it from the tribunal level perspective when I advise. There, one thing is the transfer pricing law gives the initial onus of proof of arm's length on the SSE, unlike the other cases. But once you satisfy the onus of proof, the burden of proof shifts to the TPO or the assessing officer. Then his job to prove that what I have done is wrong. So you have to actually take him upon that. You prove that what I have done is totally unfair or benefits me or this thing. And in the area of these intangibles and services and all, basically, you don't need to be 100% right. If you are 50.1% right, it's enough. And he is 49.9% right. So it's a preponderance of convenience or judgment. So this is what ideally you must build up your case on. Get as much supporting material as you can, because in this tax law is totally deficient. In fact, a lot of people, I mean those who may represent you, the tax council, don't even know the nuances of IP law, which I've actually found, which I'll show in 1 or 2 judgments which I'll take. Okay, now international rulings. Do I need to cover this, or is everyone aware of it? I mean, every year. Sorry? Carry on? Okay, because they're very famous. I think they must have been done several times. Indian rulings also. LG Special, so there will be a session on Maruti and LG Special, so I didn't cover it. I just wanted to mark this as very important, because I think there's a session on AMP, right, which I have left out deliberately. I was told that that's good. But one issue, one ruling which is not covered is tally. We have to be very careful. There's a 66-page order of the Bangalore Tribunal which came in a couple of years ago, and it was favoring the revenue. It was in relation to software transfer between an Indian company and its Dubai sub. And there too, some ridiculous amount of 400 odd crores was put as an addition. Now, I have just read the order, which is a very comprehensive order. And quite honestly, the revenue has used a method which is not even prescribed in transfer pricing, the excess earning methods. to attribute a value, arm's length. Then the SSE has not even considered regular depreciation or shelf life of the software. I mean, today if I have Windows, it's not going to continue for 50 years. I mean, there are newer and newer versions coming, old one will go in the waste basket. So this is a very interesting judgment, not only from the point of view that if you want a brief on this excess earning valuation method, which is not in the TP prescribed methods, but you also want to see an insight into the mind of the tribunal. This is a beautiful judgment. Please read. Sorry? No. It's an accounting firm. Accounts. I see, now it's Reliance. Those times it was not Reliance, I know. This was about 2.5, 3 years ago. Bangalore Tribunal, the Dubai sub. I thought that was a small private company, Reliance. Now it's Reliance has taken over. I was unaware of that. Okay.
When you said they have not charged depreciation, they have a old habit of not charging depreciation.
No, that is there, because of which all this book profit and all came because of Reliance, no? 115J earlier. Okay. Now, this is another publication which one of you buy, actually Taxman gets it out. Every year they have a publication called Let Us Share. The income tax department brings it. They give you a very good insight into their working. So this is just one example. I mean, it's not important, just as an example. Please read this publication, you'll get an insight, not only in TP and intangibles, but in all other aspects, you'll get a very good insight into what the TPO or the AO thinks. Okay, valuation. This is also simple thing which one has to value IP. I'll go fast over it because there is nothing new in this. Only thing is, one thing in valuation, that all these methods are based on subjective assumptions and adjustment. Believe me, if I tweak one assumption or I tweak one discount rate, my actual value goes for a toss, especially in the realm of IP. Whether basically it's on the additional value added and additional cash flows and additional profit. If I tweak it a little bit here and there, it goes. Then transactions, I think most of which we've already covered, assignment, and they've included intangibles. I mean, most of it is just repetitive. Then audit issues, these are the main audit issues. Ad expenditure. This marketing, though, it will be done. Marketing, cherry picking, bright line, comparables. Issue of secret comparables again. I don't know if anyone has challenged secret comparables, but in my opinion as an advocate, I have the right to cross-examine not only the TPO but from the person whose comparables are used against me on ground of natural justice. I don't know anyone in this room has actually done it. Now, this is one thing which I'd like to just point out, because to my knowledge also nobody has done it. But if the issue arises, I may do it, because, and I'm sure I'll get a favorable ruling. And there is this defense of lex non cogit ad impossibilia. This is a legal maxim which says the law does not compel you to do something impossible. This is a defense of last resort. You must only take it when your back is to the wall, but it is there. Then ultimately what happens is, these three things are most important. The beginning and end of transfer pricing is documentation. That means the more things change, the more they remain the same. That's what the French term says. And this is all these things which one has to consider. And there I'm at. And before I end, I just want to tell an anecdote or a joke, that there was a big IP convention, and the delegates after the day's convention took a walk down DN Road, near VT. They wanted to see VT, the architecture. So all these people, came running in. So software, movies, music, CD, they were aghast, because coming from the US, which has very stringent IP laws. So they told the fellow, yeah, are you aware that these are all copyrighted products? You could be prosecuted. So that fellow said, don't be angry, sir. Don't be angry, sir. Whatever we copy, we copyright. Any questions, please?
Case of assessments, as far as valuation is concerned, as you said, there is no rocket science to this, and the officers are using their assumptions very differently, and even the whole valuation with a small change is really making a lot of
Yes, absolutely.
How do you really?
As I said, it all boils down to proving your case. You have to be 50.001% vis-a-vis the officer's 49.99. Ultimately, it's up to your counsel or the person who argues that your case is reasonable and the officer's case is unreasonable. As I said, I am taking it from a tribunal level. You may have to go up to there. I mean, that is the only way which I can think of. If you have a better way. That is why you have to do your homework and be that infinitesimal bit better than what the officer or the TPO can throw at you. Have sound reasoning for your judgment. Make sure that you have not cherry-picked assumptions. That's all I can tell you. Second, I'll just...
Indian text was also copyrighted.
Sorry? No, there is no copyright on a statute. Statute or judicial proceeding. Nothing. It's an exception to infringement, 52.
I wonder if we can copyright it. A lot of our provisions are by themselves copied.
So that cannot be copied anywhere in the world.
Well, we
Indian
can
TP
copyright
provisions, Indian TP provisions are by themselves a compilation. So
it. We can copyright it and sell it as an aid to insomnia.
So with that, friends, we come to an end of a wonderful session on intangibles. We've been learning a lot of law or the legal provisions over the last so many sessions, so many days. And intellectual property rights is an area where not many of us venture. With the background that we've had for so many days, which tells us that transfer pricing is not about the legal provisions. It is more about understanding business, more about understanding the operations. The aspects that Mr. Freddy Daruwala has brought to our notice in respect of the intangible laws, the intellectual property right laws, would prove us very important in our analysis of transactions in these areas. For his comprehensive coverage and for the entertainment in the post-lunch session, may I request all of you to carry a loud vote of thanks for him.
Thank you.
Friends, we break for tea. Our next speaker is already with us, so I would request all of you to assemble back quickly. Thank you.